Hi, Shannon Waller here, and welcome to Inside Strategic Coach with Dan Sullivan and very special guest, Evan Ryan. Evan, thrilled to have you here today as an AI expert. You've got a fabulous company, Teammate AI, and you've written a great book, AI is Your Teammate. So we're kind of really interested to hear your thinking, what you've found, and as we were just talking about, some human limitations to AI. So thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to the time.
Awesome. All right. So we were just starting to embark on a conversation like, let's hit record on this. Evan, you found a couple of, I'm going to call them human limitations to technology. Can you kind of set that up for us? Because then it'd be really fun to unpack it and see where we go.
Yeah. So I was in a couple of situations recently. The first was where we were working with a client and the client said, we've got this task that we have to do and we hate it. It's terrible, but it has to get done. And then we started shadowing the person who does the task. And the person who does the task said, oh, I hate this. This is terrible, but it has to get done. So I'm doing it. And we came back to the client. We said, hey, we think for about $10,000, we can automate the entirety of the task. Like 100% of it completely gone. No human ever has to touch this again. And they came back. Their original response was, no, and this is far more than I expected it to be, meaning far more expensive than I expected it to be.
Yeah.
Then the second situation that we ran into was we were talking to a very, very large company. And we said, hey, we think that the total impact of the work here is going to be around 2.5 million hours saved per year. But every employee needs one $30 per month subscription. And that was a very bitter pill to swallow. And so who knows whether we'll move forward or not. But I was just kind of really curious about this. I've been thinking about it for the last sort of week or so. And possibly the idea here being that it doesn't matter how fast the technology itself moves because it's only as slow as the humans that are adopting it. And so we're just really interested in unpacking it.
Dan, what are your thoughts on this?
First of all, there's a word which I rely on a lot, and it's plausible. Plausible does it seem kind of right. So in both situations, I think you as an actor of the solution have to give a thought that what are the obstacles telling me about my approach to introducing AI to people? It's kind of like when I first heard of the idea of Singularity University, they have a requirement that if you go there with a product idea, you should think in terms of 1 billion customers, okay? And I said, 1 billion's nice, but does it even work for one person? Because you could spend a lot of time on something that's supposed to send 1 billion, and you got it wrong. Okay, so that's probably an expense. So I said, if it works for one person, 50% of what it would work for 10 people. If it works for 10 people, 50% of what it would work for 100. So, just from a standpoint, I would always say, well, let's just take this situation. But the first thing I would do is what that person's going to do if they're not doing that job. And I would get them clear about what that person's going to do when they're freed up. And I would include the person themselves in the plan. If you were freed up, and I understand it was 45 hours, it would free up, right? A week?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. I would get clear about where the 45 hours are going next before I came back.
Right.
Because the way you're doing it now requires a convincing argument. And I would go for the compelling offer. The compelling offer is this person very enthusiastically would be able to do this with the 45 hours.
Right. That's so interesting for a couple of reasons. The first is when we're talking to clients, the first question that any client, anybody, whenever I'm doing a talk or I'm teaching a workshop, the first question any executive ever brings me is, okay, I know AI is really interesting, but what do I do with it? And the way that we take people through the process is we say, first and foremost, where do you want to be? I can't see out any more than 3 years. I can't forecast any more than 3 years. I'd like to say 5. I can't. No. So I say, where do you want to be in 3 years? And then who's going to help you get there? Like, who are the people on your team that are going to help you get there? What are the things that they have to be doing in 2 years to be able to accomplish your 3-year goal? Then immediately it rings true. Okay, great. If they are going to be doing these things to accomplish the 3-year goal, they can't be doing those things. They can't be doing the current things. And so it's immediately clear what their future has to be. And of course, AI is going to be the solution. In this case, we weren't following that methodology. And so it makes total sense.
Yeah, you were acting like a hotshot.
A little bit, a little bit. Well, we got excited about it because for us, it's like this is such a huge increase of efficiency that they're going to get.
Yeah.
We can't wait to free these people up.
Yeah.
But the human element of it is really important. Another situation I think that's kind of very similar, but on the opposite end of the time scale, was we had a client where we only expected to make about 15 hours a week worth of difference. So the client signs up, the people all know how they're going to be ushered into their sort of like new lifestyles at work or their new work styles. Everything's already set. And then we showed up and we kind of got under the hood. We realized, oh no, this is going to be like a 1000x improvement. And so what we thought was going to be 15 hours a week was actually going to require a complete reorganization of how they were kind of structuring their work because of how efficient the computer was in this particular case. It actually created the exact same hesitation, but on the opposite side, which was, you can deal with the exponential aspect of it up front, or you can deal with the exponential aspect of it after it's done. But, in the middle, it's just technology being built.
Yeah. The other thing is that I think when you have that much change, and it's a nice model. You're giving just one person 45 hours, and then a large organization freeing up millions of hours. Humans don't naturally think in terms of exponentials because nothing in our world really operates exponentially. I mean, compound interest would be probably the most, and that takes years, compound interest. But if they experience sudden growth and it's behind them and it's in the bank, they can do their own exponentials forward. You have to give them a small version of exponential, first of all. Take 10 people who would be the most eager people to jump to a higher level, and let's just work with them for a month and see what we can do with 10 people. They would go for that. Big organization. And you say, this is how much we would charge to get 10 people charged up. All you need to do is get your foot in the door, Evan.
Right.
But it may be a bad organization. I mean, there may be all sorts of internal problems they're having right now that they wouldn't reveal to you up front, and that amount of change may take, what's a tense internal situation, and it might tip them over the edge, and they're worried about that.
Well, so that was actually something that I was thinking about. I want to get your opinion on it. Do you think that one of the big challenges with adopting this technology is that for so long, so many budgets have been justified based off of number of people? And I need this many people to do this task to be able to achieve this outcome. And when a new sort of technology like this comes around and it sort of causes everybody to rethink everything, do you think that raises tensions at the senior most levels first when we're talking about budgets, when we're talking about headcounts, we're talking about PR and other things like that, more than it does sort of at the implementation level of these discussions?
Yeah. If you don't know where the leadership is, you don't know where the rest of the organization is.
Right.
The other problem with AI, different from computers is a piece of equipment. AI is invisible. And it's hard for people to tangibly grasp an intangible.
Well, and one of the things that I even say, so it's funny that I keep saying this because it's like I'm like hearing you say a lot of the stuff that I say, but because you're saying it, it's like I have fresh ears. I say all the time to people that don't understand how software works, software is magic, and then AI is like magic times a million. So it's inherently unclear, it's inherently vague, and so it's inherently a little bit scary.
Yeah. We have a discussion group. Shannon and I are a member of a quarterly discussion group, and everybody sends in articles, which we put everything into 8.5 by 11, and then we have a spiral. It's a nice book. It's actually a really good book. And there was an article that Paul Bourbonier, he's actually longest running of my clients. He'll be 37 years in July. He'll be in the program. Okay, which is 8 years longer than you've been on the planet, Evan.
Yeah.
And it was about how Canada as a country is just clueless about IP. about intellectual property. And they're producing a lot, but they don't actually own the ideas of the machines that they're producing. And they were talking, it was the graph that Keegan Caldwell shows us of S&P 500 in 1980, 82% valuation on tangibles, 18 on intangibles. 40 years later, just the opposite. And it's hard for people to grasp intangibles unless they're conceptually prone. So my sense is you're trying to sell an invisible. So what you need is tangible proof of selling an intangible. Okay. You've got enough people now that have really received the benefit of what you do that you can show this person did this and this person did this, this company did. I think you got to start showing cases. So we had a client who was in the 10 times connector this morning. He had dealt with you last week and they freed up 3 people, 6,000 hours. You reduced it to 100 hours. Andy.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. I'm glad he said that out loud.
I'm giving you your test case, and then he's going to see you again with a group of 12.
Yeah.
And then he's going to see you in a couple of weeks with a group of 120. Which sounds like an exponential to me of exposure.
It is quite exponential. And actually, I was preparing for the event where I'll be speaking in front of 120. And a woman who works for one of the people that we're collaborating with walked in and she said, I'm somebody who filled out a survey and said, AI is not for me, with like a whole big checkmark motion as she said it. And she said, I looked at what you guys put together and I thought, I don't know how I can get more of that, but I need it. And so, you know what? I think that there's certainly a case there. Yeah.
And I think what you have to do, you have to go on the gap and the gain concept. The reason why the gain works is that it's already happened. I mean, it's going to become more widely known, more widely talked about, and people are going to be giving examples. But I think most people are very practical and they have to see practical evidence. They can't just imagine. I mean, I can sort of see the future pretty well and work backwards from the future and see what we have to do now if we're going to get to that future. Most people can't do that. I mean, it's strategy circle time. You have the vision and then you say, okay, tell me what the obstacles are. I think it's strategy circle time.
That is such a very interesting thing. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is how the computer and the mobile phone, like the computer and the smartphone, are fundamentally different from the internet, where the internet is a technology that allows you to sort of distribute ideas, but it's invisible. You can't see the internet. Whereas the computer and the mobile phone are something that are physical, you can see. And so I've been kind of thinking about the idea where maybe this kind of technology won't take off sort of like the iPhone did. Although ChatGPT has been so successful so fast, it doesn't have the lasting like kind of staying power that the iPhone has had. And maybe it is because of that sort of invisibility where the use cases or the capabilities of technology creep in over time in ways that seem really familiar versus, ushering in a new epoch of society like the Gutenberg press or the personal computer did.
Yeah. Shannon, what's your take on this?
It's interesting. I was just thinking as you guys were both talking that, yes, ChatGPT, big splash, all the things. But in terms of most people's day-to-day life, even, Uber drivers, I was going to the airport the other day, AI is so scary. So I'm like, oh, no, ChatGPT is your thinking partner and Perplexity.ai is your research partner. I was giving all the stuff I've learned from you, Evan.
Yeah, I wouldn't start with limousine drivers. I really wouldn't start with them.
No, Uber drivers, yeah.
Or
anyway,
Uber.
Yeah.
That's not who I would start with. They're just trying to learn how to game the system that they're in.
Totally. But I do think it is one of those things where it's going to be deceptive, like underneath, and then all of a sudden the knee of the curve will happen and then, it will be even more exponential. We're still, even with all the hoopla and all the press, I think we're still in that kind of, people aren't really sure. They're uncertain. Most people don't do it. And it's fascinating to me, Evan, because one of the questions I'd love us to talk about is what kind of mindset do you need to take full advantage? Like for me, with your first scenario that you were describing, I'm like, okay, I'm looking at that person's salary and I'm comparing it to $10,000. The 10,000 is going to be a fraction because no one's working 45 hours a week for 10 grand a year. So it's like, what kind of mindset's required? To your point, Dan, I think a slightly more exponential mindset, if you could develop such a thing. But what will allow people to take full advantage and not make what looks like kind of strange economic decisions that you've been running into?
So I'm 29. And this is going to get very philosophical. Then I promise the question will get answered. I'm 29.
We're good with that.
I'm friends with a lot of people that are 29. And one of the sort of things that I'm seeing sort of happen as people turn my age and then eventually turn 30, the whole big like birthday and all this stuff, is a lot of people, I think, are starting to sort of ask themselves, like, is this all there is? Mm-hmm. Like, I thought that things were going to be different, or like all the problems of my life were going to be solved, or whatever it might be. But I'm starting to get this sort of sense of, is this all there is? And then those people are sort of being divided into two camps. There's camp A that sort of accepts defeat. And then there's camp B that embraces whatever it is that they've truly been wanting or desiring, or the life that they've been wanting to live, or whatever it is, fill in the blank. But what's interesting is I've been watching this in my personal life. And last week I was giving a talk and somebody asked me at the very end of a very long, like 3 or 4 hour seminar, they asked me, where does this all end?
Oh dear.
Well, no, because, I mean, in practical terms, in practical life, things have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and again, as you're dealing with exponentials.
Yeah.
I have a whole series of files of quotes of mine. And I said, I find that technology doesn't become normal until it becomes boring.
Oh, I like that.
That is really good.
Technology doesn't become normal until it becomes boring.
That is great.
Yeah, that's every day. Oh, you're talking about AI stuff. Not, this is brand new and it's scary. We're going to hear some more of that AI stuff. I've heard a lot of AI stuff and everything. And what it means, it's been normalized. I had a conversation with Peter Diamandis. I said, we're not going to get to the future until it's normal. Whatever you think the future is, you won't be there until it's normal. Mm-hmm. We have to normalize our way into the future. Okay. And that means that you have to start small and get used to it. Like, I'm having a lot of fun with Perplexity, at your recommendation, Evan. And it's a very cordial companion. I mean, it goes out of its way to help me. I mean, it's one of the more helpful things. So I asked it a question. Question is, of all the Americans born in 1944, what percentage of them are still alive today? It took a while, like 20 seconds. And it came back to me and says, actually, there aren't very good statistics on this. And it says, the best I can come up with is a study was done of people born in 1947. And in 2021, 63% of them were still alive. So maybe you can sort of figure, and we find that the death rates are pretty constant. So that was 3 years ago, and they're 3 years younger. So maybe you can work backward that maybe it's around 58%, but it went out of its way to try to help me think it through.
Mm-hmm.
Love that.
That is so interesting.
And I'm finding it very congenial. You said on your podcast 2 weeks ago that you feel like it's on the same side of the table with you.
Yeah.
For most people, AI is not on the same side of the table with them.
Yeah, it's really their competition, or at least they perceive it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Or it's the boogeyman under the bed, and you can't go to the bathroom at night.
Yeah,
it's going to get you. It may not get you onto the way to the bathroom, but when you're coming back, it's
right.
Yeah, it lets you go to the bathroom first.
So one approach how do we normalize AI?
I think, like, the simple ways, that's kind of a strategy that I took a little bit from you, is like, what's the last piece of technology that everybody used? And then what was before that?
The phone.
Yeah. So the phone is like a great example. Well, what did you do before your phone? Well, you'd carry around all this stuff in your pockets. You'd have to like pick up the phone and like actually dial the numbers. You wouldn't be able to see people. You didn't have your email. You had to pay like per kilobyte to be able to access the internet. Or even better yet, if you didn't have an internet plan and you hit the internet button, you hit and then to try to get it so that you didn't get charged. There are all these things, but then also there's like just simple things like before Google Drive, you had to get up from your desk and you had to walk over to the filing cabinet, find the right file, get the piece of paper out, make a copy of it, put the file back, and then walk back to your desk. And I think that strategy of showing people, hey, these kinds of technological revolutions have happened before and they'll happen again, it is one that's successful because I think to people, it makes it immediately sort of accessible.
Yeah.
The other thing is I think that San Francisco and Silicon Valley and the media both talk about the AI like it's the end times. And when you get a question like, how does this end? It's like it's the end, not an end.
They're positioning it like it's religion and it's the Messiah coming.
Yeah.
I believe that a lot of what goes on in Silicon Valley is either a religion or it's like Las Vegas. They're getting people to bet on the bet. They're not actually betting on the technology. They want to get you
They're betting on the bet.
on the bet. And my sense is it's just normal. I mean, Louis C.K., comedian, and he says, remember the old phone and you had an operator and, you put through a phone call and it was $100 a minute to California and you had to talk really fast because the seconds were going by. And he says, now I see people with their iPhone and they're going like this. And it's been 5 seconds. He says, come on. I don't know who it was, but they added up all the separate technologies and what those technologies were each worth that are in an iPhone. It's like, this is more power than the entire Apollo project used to put a man on the moon is available to you at any time. And you're saying, yeah, so what, And I think that so what is the time when the technology really starts getting used. Okay.
Right. When it's finally normal.
Yeah. When it's normal. So I think an approach for you is to say, I want to tell you what AI is going to be like when you consider it normal. You're doing this, and just take them through a case study of what you've done. And you said, well, first of all, you identified what you wanted to do if you were freed up by 20 hours a week from this. Okay, so then you create the thing. So now you've got a real reason to make the change. Okay, So I would just create a 5-step normalization process for AI.
That is an excellent idea. I'm really going to take that back and think about that.
You're 29. I mean, it takes me a little longer to adjust the things that you do. But I do have a record of how I've adjusted to 10 technologies in my life. And I know that after a while, it was just normal. So I have the success record that I do adjust, and I'm going to adjust to this one.
Well, I think one of the things that makes you in Strategic Coach very unique, I'm interested to hear your opinion on this, is your vision of the future is not one where the technology is the future. It's one where your technology enables that future to happen faster. You're excellent users of technology, but nobody at Strategic Coach has talked about taking your IP, for example, and then loading it into a chatbot so people can start to tinker with it. Nobody at Strategic Coach is talking about how can you use technology to create, new offshoot businesses, for example. It's always in search of a future that's not technology related, that's transformation related. What do you think about that? Do you think that that's what allows you to think about the tech differently?
Yeah. I have a quarterly book, and I think it'll probably be sometime in the next 12 months. It's called Timeless Technology. And I said there's a way of thinking about technology, that technology has always done this for 100,000 years, that first of all, one new capability always introduces new capabilities. That's a feature of technology. It always becomes an independent factor in itself. Once it's created and it proves itself useful, it always takes on an independent status. Okay, technology becomes autonomous, it has a natural tendency to take one technology and try to see if you can connect it to another technology to create a third, better technology. It always does this. Technology does this right from the beginning. I would start with what you want your check writers to normalize in their life. And I think it's a strategy circle. Okay. And here's a little test you can do. You can say, 3 years from today, I think it's possible for you to have achieved this and this and this and this and this using not only the artificial intelligence applications that are available right now, but the applications that will become available over the next 3 years. I think it's possible for you to do this. Now, you tell me the 10 obstacles why you won't do that. And then they bring up the obstacles and you say, well, that's an interesting obstacle. Let's look at it. And it becomes a strategy circle. And you lay out the future for them because all the time they're featuring the obstacles, they're entertaining the future. And you got them caught in the conversation now.
I think they really, you said this earlier, start off philosophical and end up really practical. And I think that's a very practical application. Like, oh, instead of using the dial-up telephone, you'll be using this, or instead of doing this kind of a search, you'll be doing that. There was a great article we read for the discussion group, Dan, that talked about the utility, like the problems we want to solve are the same. We just keep having better technology with which to solve it. And so we're very clear on who we are, who we're for, what we're doing. And so we just want better and better tech that will help us accomplish it.
Yeah. About 10 years ago, I had a client in the program, and he had a steel fabrication factory in Pittsburgh area. I asked him something, and he had 600 workers in his factory. And he says, my grandfather started this business 50 years ago. And I said, so for the amount of work you're getting done now, how many workers did he require? He said he had 3,000. I have 600. I'm outproducing him. Okay. And if I talked to him today, he could probably do the same amount with 60 workers with robot-enabled machinery. Okay. And I think people need these past jumps to grasp future jumps. I think it's necessary. I worked at an ad agency in the 1970s, and our artists in Toronto, our computer artists and the writing with the software, the writing, the cartooning, and everything else, we can produce more in a week than 15 in the creative department could produce in a month. We can produce more just with our computers than they could. The cartoonist I have on my quarterly books, I get the equivalent of one new of him every year, just because of the speed of the computer and the new software.
Yeah.
Well, I think you have to give a lot of past exponential jumps to actually make it okay for them to do a future exponential jump.
Right. And I think one of the things too, as I'm kind of processing this in real time, one of the stories that I'm kind of drawing on right now, when we're thinking about future exponential jumps, I think one of the things that a lot of people think about is, well, what is my future? Like, what is my ambition when these big problems that I've been trying to solve, like beating my head against the wall for 6 months or 12 months or 2 years or however long, once these are solved? And one of the stories that I'm thinking of is that when Steve Jobs was at Pixar, he wrote an email to his employees and he said that when they finished Toy Story, which was the first movie from Pixar, and when they were building it, their strategy was, we're going to build Toy Story. We're going to build all the building blocks to create an animated movie. And then we're just going to combine them in new ways. And we can just churn and burn animated movies, my language, churn and burn animated movies. And the only limitation is really going to be our storytelling and how fast we can get these new ones out. He said the problem was that as they accomplished Toy Story, then their ambitions grew on how they wanted to push the envelope for the next animated movie. And now here we are 30 years later, and they're animating individual strands of hair on Rapunzel. And so I think that there is a lot of difficulty, and I guess this goes to AI as your competition with most employees as well, which is, well, when my current present is no longer my present, what is my future?
Yeah. Who am I?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, when the things I've been struggling with, or when my strategy is truly overcome, or when my strategy is truly to fruition, what is that future there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and that goes back to the beginning when, talking about that guy whose job gets completely liberated, what is his future?
Yeah.
It was a job and an employee, right?
True.
Yeah.
Was it a guy? I don't even know.
It was a job and an employee.
Okay, there you go. A job and an employee. But what does that person do when they're freed up? And what is the higher level work? Admittedly, it wasn't a fun job. It wasn't satisfying. So I think remembering that human element, that might be the limitation as we're talking about this, to how fast people embrace it.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting in my mind too is going back to first year of coach, we talked about strategy circle, but I also think that unique ability is going to play such a huge role in this. Because if you're unclear about that, then I think that you're inherently unclear about the future.
Well, I think if you're not operating in your unique ability, you think you're the stuff of your job. And your identity is tied up. I mean, one of the things, I put a lot of emphasis, work you don't like, find somebody who loves doing it. And a lot of the strategic coach clients, they develop this in their business and they do a good job with it. They constantly grow with it. But then they go home and they're, the person they're married to, in this case, it'd be their wife, they're saying, you don't have to do the housework. You don't have to do the cooking. We can do that. And they said, we can get people in. We have enough money now. We can get people in to do it. But it's her identity. And you're asking her to give up her identity. That's her crucial importance every day. You're asking her to give up her, or, we can have nannies and we can, and everything. But who she is tied up with those activities. So there's a lot of complexity. Technological change seems like a simple thing. If you're only talking about the technology, it is. But humans are multifaceted. They got a lot of different dimensions. And they all have to come forward in an agreeable manner. So I think it's a great topic that you've introduced today.
Well, I think it's going to be one that spans the next, decade or two.
Yeah.
Is really as these tools continue to develop.
Yeah. Moore's Law became sort of talked about, and the microchip started getting talked about right when I created Strategic Coach. Well, I created coaching. I didn't have the name for it at that point. So there's all this talk at various technology conferences how productivity is going to go through the roof. So I asked Perplexity an interesting question. I said, Perplexity, what is the percentage of rate of increase of productivity from 1974 to 2024, 50-year period? Then productivity has to do with labor productivity. I mean, a lot of people call productivity as machines turning out a lot of stuff. It's not. It's measured in labor, how much human time is involved. And compare that with the 50 years before 1974, and the rates of productivity were much higher before 1974 than they've been in the last 50 years. And what's misleading is huge amounts of money have been made by a small number of people, but not much money has been earned by a large number of people, and that drags down productivity rates. Productivity doesn't mean anything unless everybody's gaining. Perplexity and I have wonderful conversations.
Yeah, I'm sitting and processing a little bit here.
No, I'm just treating Perplexity as a person who's really gifted.
It's interesting, Dan, that there have been no increases in productivity in the last 50 years.
There's been increases, but not as much as the 50 years before that.
Got you. Mm-hmm.
And part of the reason was industrialization has a different kind of productivity than microchip productivity. Okay.
And something that I'm curious about is if industrialization really led to upskilling, because it was clear you were working with your hands and you made one thing, and now you're working with your hands and you're making something that's much more complex. You can see where the skills got better. But what I'm curious about is if the microchip really in large part led to a reskilling, where you're just kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul a little bit, which is what kept the productivity the same.
Yeah, well, part of it is that it's an extreme form of creative destruction. Joseph Schumpeter, he's an Austrian economist, he coined the term that capitalism was a process of creative destruction, that new things would be created that destroyed old things. Well, creating new things is productive, but destroying old things is unproductive. Okay. And, in the rates, I mean, when they built a steel factory in the 1920s, it was amortized over 50 years. Things had to stay exactly the same over 50 years. You couldn't be fooling around with the technology. Okay. Now, new technologies are replacing other technologies in months, in weeks, in days.
Yeah.
And so things are in a constant state of disruption. That's not productive. If I look at our model of strategic coach, it's not very different in 2024 than it was in 1989. Basically, the same target audience, basically the same workshop process. I mean, we've gotten better at it, and we've brought in technology to enhance it. But basically, the model hasn't changed in 35 years. That really produces productivity if you can stay with something for a long time.
Right. And it goes back to what we were saying regarding compounding and how that can continue to compound over time. But if you're in a create destroy loop, there's very little compounding that can take place.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you really want to make money, invest in residential real estate in Toronto. That really, really makes money. I'll tell you, over long term, it really makes money. Yeah.
Well, Shannon, I'm curious what your opinion is, especially as somebody who's a leader of teams, in terms of just the general productivity of it and how it's being successfully integrated, but also unsuccessfully integrated, which I think is the other primary fear. How do I make sure I do this and don't do it unsuccessfully?
And that's the fear, every leader, that they'll bring it in and spend money investing in people's training and time and licenses, and then it won't get used. That's the number one fear. It's kind of why I asked my question earlier, what mindset is required for this? It's obviously a growth mindset. And to your point also about unique ability, when people know what their unique ability is, what they love to do and are best at, when they're a hero to other people, you produce exponential results yourself, then anything to free you up to do more of that is embraced. You're like, oh my God, I cannot wait to get freed up from this level of work so I can do this level of work. And to my mind, by definition, that's a creative endeavor. That's something that AI is not capable of doing. So I think you kind of need that unique ability mindset. You need that growth mindset. And certainly as a business owner, you're going to want to find people who have that mindset, or it's going to be really frustrating to work with them, Evan. And I think the jury's out in terms of how people are receiving it. There's a lot more fear than there is. I know certainly the clientele that we work with, Dan, they're like, yes. So many people in our program are, in fact, leaders in AI as well. You're ahead of the pack there, Evan. Well, you and Mike. It's just really fun to see how people are just doing incredible things, but that's not the norm. I think a lot of people are really afraid of it. The one comment I keep coming back to, and I share a lot when I'm coaching, Dan, is that technology is automated teamwork. And so there's teamwork and there's automated teamwork. And when you put it like that, it just lowers the fear factor. And they're like, oh yeah, it is. Like the number of devices I have on this one is kind of incredible. I've got a phone, I've got Zoom, I've got all the things. But when you think of it that way, you're like, oh, okay, I don't really need to be afraid of it because I do know teamwork. So I think there are some ways of getting people's mindsets a little clearer, but we still have it's really new. And like most new things, a lot of people shy away from it.
Yeah. On the other hand, I use my cell phone. I keep it charged up because I get to read my Oura ring in the morning. Otherwise, it would go weeks without being charged up. I do nothing with my cell phone.
No, you don't. Yeah. You really don't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shannon, what do you think about, I guess, for teams, where you're now discovering, or if you're a team leader and you're now discovering that some of the members of your team don't have the growth mindset that you originally thought that they had? What are your thoughts or messages there?
Well, I'm of the mindset, and this was expressed several times at our Free Zone Summit last year, is that AI won't necessarily replace people, but people who know AI will replace people who don't. And that is, to my mind, 100% true. And it doesn't have to be AI. You can put in any technology there. So if someone's not willing to grow, adapt, learn a more efficient, more productive way of doing things, I'm sorry, they're not an A player on your team. And if you want to grow and if you want to accelerate, I think you need to have some discernment about that. That may not sound terribly compassionate, but if you want to grow, If you want to have a self-managing company, you better have people who are self-managing. If you want a growth-oriented company, you need people in it who are growth-minded. Not everyone has to jump on board at the same moment. I'm an early adopter. Other people aren't. But it's like they can't actually be resistant. I don't see a long-term sustainability plan for that.
Yeah. Evan, 2 weeks ago on your podcast, you said that there was a separation between the learners and the non-learners. I think that's a very, very useful distinction. But I think there's a time frame that there's people who are the lead learners. In other words, that we played around with the concept of tinkering. Who are the tinkerers? They're playing with new stuff all the time. And my attitude is I always play with the players. In other words, whoever already are the existing players, then I'm going to work with them because they're going to become the leaders of the other people. And an analysis, all you want is a job well done. You want people, regardless of what job they're doing, you would like to have the job well done. And I would say that we have invaluable people in our company who, from an outside observation, I wouldn't say that that person is a learner of new things, but they're always improving what they're doing and doing a great job. So you couldn't interest them in doing something new, but they're always discovering new ways to improve what they're doing.
Yeah. And that, to me, Dan, is someone who's growth-oriented, who's growth-minded, right? They're embracing efficiencies and effectiveness, and they're doing experience transformers and learning how to do things better. So, yes. And as my husband Bruce said, even slow learners are learners.
Well, and sometimes slow learners are better learners than fast learners.
True story. True story. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But you're a pioneer, so you have a real keen interest in not talking to people who are going to waste your time.
Yeah. Are you saying that to me or to Evan, Dan?
I'm saying to Evan.
Yeah.
That Evan, in terms of what he's doing with AI, is a lead pioneer. You're a teacher of other people on how to turn AI into a great teammate of your company.
Well, I think what's interesting is that one of the dynamics that we see, and this is just all stuff that we're watching unfold in real time. You talk about kind of creativity and destruction at the same time. Yeah, we're living in that a little bit right now as the technology develops. Every day there's a new announcement of something cool that's happening. But one of the things that is really interesting as we're going about this, and maybe it's worth exploring, maybe it's not, is that sometimes the lower levels of the company, if you look at an org chart, the lower levels of the company are all in, gung-ho, ready to move on AI. And it's the senior levels that were originally very interested in the shiny object and then all of a sudden sort of back away slowly or sometimes back away quickly. And I'm not really sure what makes a senior level person do that versus not yet. Like I haven't observed enough cases of it. But I think the other interesting point or the other interesting discussion there is if you're an employee at one of those businesses, how are you identifying something like that and then starting to look at other options, or what are the other options that you decide to look at? Because clearly the leadership is a little bit slow on the uptick.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I like your point that sometimes the lower levels are like, yes, because they're the ones dealing with the inefficiencies, the slowdowns. They're looking to get freed up to do more interesting work. So they're like, yeah, they actually have very few barriers to entry with this. I can't put myself in the minds of those senior leaders other than they're often used to being the middle person. And I think they get a little worried about their jobs if they're not the one controlling it.
Well, where are they in their career? They may only be planning another 5 years, 10 years, So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and one of the things that this is actually bringing up right now, it changed my life when Christy Chambers said this. She said, a free day for you is a free day for your team from you. It seems almost like very similar to that. It's like, an automation for you is not really for you, right? Like you see it on your P&L, but it's not really for you. It's actually for everybody else. Consider it like a gift.
I like that. So just as we wrap up, what are some action items? What are some ways that people can put some of what we've talked about in terms of productivity into play? How can we expand some people's thinking? What would you, Dan and Evan, what would you recommend?
I'd find the obstacles. I'd approach it from, the strategy circle approach that what it can look like in 3 years. So that's your specialty, or at least a year, let's say a year, that a year from now, this is possible, this is possible, this is possible, this is possible. And I can prove from case studies that this
Nice.
happened. What I want to know is if you'd like that. First of all, I'd like to know if you would actually like that and what would be the benefits of achieving that in a year. Okay. Because it's hard to create a vision out of something that's intangible. It's very, very hard. And I think you have to put it in terms of hours saved, new projects started because people were freed up from doing this, and everything like that. I think you have to work what's possible. I don't think with AI you should go too much further than a year because you can really visualize a year and you can really visualize that and then say, okay, so let's talk about all the obstacles that would prevent us from doing that. And you'll learn a lot from that because there'll be categories of obstacles. If you do it with 10 different companies, there'll be categories that fall out. But the subject is to normalize AI as a regular automatic teammate, to normalize the concept that we're going to have automatic teammate going forward.
I love that.
That's my take on it.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan. And Evan, from your success stories, from people who have adopted it quickly and well, what are some of the things that you observe? What were some of the common elements from them?
The people that were the most successful, I think, are the ones that used AI to free up their best team members. And it's very tempting, I think, especially if you have underperformers on your team that you're desperate to get rid of. It's very tempting to use the AI there. And that's the fastest way to build the corporate immune system against AI. But the ones that were the most successful were always the ones that were freeing up their best team members, because really their best team members were the ones that were making the 1 or the 2 year vision happen, right? Like freeing them up, immediately upskilled or kind of up-leveled them. And then everybody else was able to follow suit. And so I think leaving this, if you're somebody listening, wondering, where do I start with AI? It's really, how do you want to use your best people better?
That is such a great question to leave with. What's bogging them down? What's holding them back? What's taking their time? How can we get those irritation factors out to free them to do what they're best at? I mean, what a great question.
Yeah, or even looking at a combination of, what are all the tasks that they do that they don't like to do, but then also what's their DOS? Like what's their personal DOS? And how can you help exemplify that personal DOS for them?
And if anyone listening is not familiar with DOS, it's what are their dangers? What are they worried about? What are their opportunities, which is what they're excited about? And then what are their strengths to be leveraged? And that's what they're confident about. So yes, when you really understand their dangers, opportunities, and strengths, you can really customize a result for them. Awesome.
When I'm 100 and you're approaching 50, Evan, we're still going to be talking about normalizing AI.
I think we still will be.
I think that's true.
When are we going to get there?
Yeah.
There's no there to get to.
When's this going to end?
Yeah.
Never.
I don't think it does.
It's not going to end. That's what's foolish about the attitude out of Silicon Valley and the media, that this changes everything. No, it doesn't. It's just what humans have always done, is normalize themselves to a new situation. I'm a real war history buff. And in the Second World War, both in the European War and the Pacific War, the United States was very, very smart how they used their pilots because they were brand new technologies. I mean, the jump in aeronautical technology in about a 5-year period during the Second World War was very profound, especially in the Pacific where they had to land the planes on the boat, which the waves are going like this. There's winds coming in. And they noticed something, that the Japanese had great pilots, the best pilots in the world at the beginning of the Second World War, and both routines were the Japanese. They were just phenomenal. But they had a limited number of them, the highly skilled, and they used them until they died. And the Americans had really great pilots. They used them for 20 or 30 missions, took them out of action, sent them back to the United States to train the new pilots. And they kept taking their best pilots and turning them into teachers. I think AI is going to be the same way.
I like that a lot, Dan. That's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. Some of the German pilots had 600 missions before they were killed.
Wow.
Americans that have 50, 60 missions, they're out of there. And they knew at 50 missions, they were gone. So they got their missions in real fast so that they could get stateside.
Awesome. Evan, I'm sure people will want to know more about AI and how they can make it a great teammate. So how can people find you, reach out to you? How can people connect?
Yeah, teammateai.com, or check out my book, AI is Your Teammate, which is a great starting place.
It sure is. Awesome. Great. Well, fabulous conversation. I really appreciate the human angle on how that might be a limitation to AI. I think that was fascinating and interesting. And I think coaching from you, Dan, about making it really practical and really
normal,
getting some successes, making it normal, figuring out the specific obstacles, everything that you've talked about, Evan, with kind of just people thinking it through in a new way is really powerful. So thank you both. Great conversation.
And Evan, thanks for helping us navigate our way into this new field.
Oh, thank you for giving me a framework for thinking about a lot of this stuff.
Yep.
Awesome.